Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for a San Antonio Spurs trade guide where we focus on San Antonio's current situation and take a long-term outlook at what I think this team could do this trade deadline to build themselves forward for the foreseeable future. Now, for San Antonio here, there's a couple things I want to say right off the bat. Right now, even though they're losing games, I think there are a lot of positives that are not getting covered in the national media because, first of all, it's San Antonio. It's a smaller market in terms of, what ESPN would like to cover. Now, I know you guys, Spurs fans, you guys are big diehard fans. So I want to shout out Keldon Johnson. I want to shout out Devin Vassell, who I loved coming out of Florida State. I want to shout out Jeremy Sohan, who the other night against New Orleans had a career night for himself, including both his college and NBA career. And there's a lot of solid to good players on this team. I know right now they're not winning games, but this team is relatively young. And right now they're not defending very well. They do play with a very high pace. I believe they're 7th in the NBA in pace. But, Spurs fans, I just want to give you guys a little bit of love as well. I know how good of fans you guys are. So I think that really stands out to me. Spurs fans, comment, go Spurs, go in the comment section right now. And we'd love for you guys to hit the like button as well while you're doing that. And subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I think the NBA trade deadline is a really important moment in San Antonio Spurs future basketball. This year, I think they have a lot of tough questions that they have to answer and put themselves in a position to continue to really do what San Antonio Spurs basketball is about, which is winning. You know, we've seen it for over 2 decades. Last couple of years, they haven't been up to that standard, but I think Spurs fans, you guys are probably enjoying seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard too, getting to root for some of these good young players. And it's a different style of basketball for sure. And I think Popovich is doing a good job ushering in some of the future. Obviously, the winning's not there right now, but it's a tough team to win with in terms of the talent. But there are definite positives. You look at last year, the fact that they made the play-in was fantastic and phenomenal. I think they got off of DeJounte Murray at the right time, just given their situation with the fact that he likely wasn't going to stick around in San Antonio. So I just want to shout you guys out as well as Spurs fans. You've been through some awesome years. You've also been through some down years. So it's a real testament to stick with your team like you guys are right now. So hopefully you guys do enjoy this video. For the video here, this is what we're going to do in this one. We're going to talk about their current record, which is, a good indicator as whether a team's good, bad, whether they're going to be looking to buy, sell. We'll talk about that a little bit. Then we're going to look at some of those tradable players and the contract situations and what they would like to do with some of those players. I think there's some definite fun options for them out on the table. So I think there's going to be a lot to break down with that. The draft pick situation, I think, is an important one here for San Antonio as well. And they're a very interesting team, a team that I think could really play out well long term in terms of the assets that they already currently possess. If they make the right selections on draft nights, they're in a pretty good spot, but they also have a lot to work with in terms of trades. We'll look at their long-term cap space, and maybe if that's at all a determinant in what San Antonio looks to do. We'll talk about whether they are a buyer or seller. I think that's pretty clear. You clicked on this video kind of knowing already that they're probably looking to sell, so it's not going to be too groundbreaking when I say they're sellers. But I do have an interesting note on them at that point of the video. And then projected activity level, I think really important to talk about how active this Spurs team is going to be. And I've got actually a pretty funny graphic at the end there to kind of show what I think the Spurs activity level is going to look like this trade deadline. So their current record this year, 11-23. And as you can see by my graphic here, they're more interested in the NBA draft lottery at this point than anything else. And there's actually a really important thing to watch for if you're a Spurs fan. And it's kind of counterintuitive. You almost have to cheer for your team to lose, which never feels great. But this team's not going to win a ton anyway. They're 14th in the West, but 27th overall. And that 27th overall mark is pretty important. When you're looking at draft odds, there's a significant benefit to being in the top 3 in terms of 30th best, so worst overall, the 29th best, which would be second worst, and 28th best, which is third worst. Those 3 teams have the best odds at landing in the number 1 overall pick at a 14% chance. The 4th best odds are 12.5% chance. I've studied the NBA draft lottery a ton. I've got a very good video up on the channel that explains the NBA draft lottery as well that I would recommend looking up. Just search Utility Sports NBA draft lottery explained, and you'll be able to find it on YouTube. But realistically, right now with where they're at, you want to have the best chance at landing a guy named Victor Wembanyama. Everybody knows that. I think the Spurs would love to have him. You think about this, franchise's key players over the years, David Robinson with the Admiral, Tim Duncan. You want to have the generational big man. They've been lucky enough to have 2 of them already, and I think it's really possible to end up with a 3rd. So if you want some good luck right now, comment #Victor Wembanyama in the comment section to wish your team some good luck here. Now, if you're not a Spurs fan, you're gonna be saying, "Whoa, please don't be commenting that." But I think Wembanyama clearly is a franchise-changing player. I do a lot with the NBA draft. I study these players very intently. There's going to be an NBA mock draft coming out soon on the channel as well that I would say to stick around for and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on that. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Those usually end up being about an hour long in terms of the actual length of those videos. So to talk about the players for that duration of time this early in the season shows how much work I put into that. So hopefully you guys do appreciate that work. But I think San Antonio is a team that, it's really going to be easy for whoever doesn't get the first pick, which is going to be 29 teams, to be disappointed about that, because obviously Victor Wembanyama is such an intriguing, freakish player that everybody wants. If San Antonio gets picked 2 or 3 or 4 or heck even pick 6, it's not the end of the world. This draft is loaded. It's deep. They can get other good players that are going to be key for them building forward. Now, it's not what you want to hear. It's not going to be like, oh yes, we got pick 3. But my point here is, your hope doesn't end on draft lottery night if you don't get the first overall pick. I think that's something that everyone needs to keep in mind. Yes, it's okay to be bummed, but if they don't get the first pick, which I think is possible they do, but if they don't, it's not the end of the world for that team for sure. Let's look at their tradable players. This is where I think the video gets super interesting. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit more at length in this graphic here about what I could see happening for each player as we go. First of all, I think they have one of the most important trade pieces in the entire NBA for this NBA trade deadline, and that is Jakob Poeltl for the San Antonio Spurs. He has been phenomenal this year at key moments. I think his offense has really taken a big step forward in the last 2-3 years. He's averaging around 10 points a game, which doesn't really jump off the page, but when you actually watch him, he's definitely more skilled than when they acquired him. They've done a good job developing him. He chooses his spots well, and when he does, look to score the basketball, he's actually pretty solid at it. Not someone you're going to feed the ball to 20 times a game in the low post, but he takes advantage of his opportunities. I think the one thing with Jakob that makes him a very intriguing center, first of all, is the contract. 1 year, $9.4 million expiring deal. First of all, San Antonio, there's a lot of risk if they don't trade him, because he would go to unrestricted free agency at 27 years old, the heart of his prime. Every single team's going to want him for what he gives, and he's going to sign a nice 3-year, $39 million contract, maybe 4 years, $50 million contract, somewhere in that range. I'm looking at anywhere from $13 to $17 million a year for him. So that's not too much to pay. San Antonio would love to get him on that. The issue though is Jakob Poeltl is going to have options, and there's going to be better teams that are going to want to give him similar money to what San Antonio does. Now, the Spurs could say, hey, we think Jakob's a really important part to our team, which I think he is as well. The issue with trading a guy like Jakob Poeltl, it means you no longer have Jakob Poeltl, and it's hard to find another one of those guys. I think Jakob Poeltl is one of the more underrated players in the league. I think that he is a player that could really impact winning on the right roster. He's a phenomenal drop coverage big. I think people underrate how big of a human being he is. He takes up a ton of space. I actually had the luxury of watching the Spurs team live in person this year. And it was a pleasure. They got a win in that game. Jakob Poeltl looked phenomenal. And I think he was the player that stood out the most to me in terms of flexibility, in terms of where he could go and really help teams. He's an awesome drop coverage big who I think one other element, he hits the glass hard. He's a really good rebounder in terms of securing boards. But the reason he's so good at it, he hits his box out like 98% of the time, it feels like. It just feels like positionally, he always knows where to be defensively. And if you want to win games in April, May, June, you need players like Jakob Poeltl there to do so. And I think that he's one of the more underrated players. Like I said, And it's because he doesn't get a lot of love or, glam from some of the bigger media outlets, because he is not going to put up highlight plays. He's just going to make consistent, fundamental plays. And that is really what wins games. Now, I know San Antonio's not winning games. There's other issues with that right now on why. I think guard plays a big question for them. Trey Jones is doing the perfect, Jones brother thing where he gets a ton of assists and doesn't turn over the basketball. But I still think that this team needs better guard play in terms of, dynamism. I think Trey Jones is going to be a good backup point guard in his career. I think that, a guy like Scoot Henderson would be phenomenal for them. And if they still have Jakob Poeltl, then you would say, well, that's a good building block for us to have with Scoot Henderson. So that's why I think that trading him doesn't necessarily make the most sense. But I think it's probably something they will do, just because I think there's going to be too much pressure on them to lose him in free agency. Teams that I think are good fits, I think the Los Angeles Lakers are, especially with Anthony Davis missing extended time here. I think that any good player in the NBA is an upgrade for the Lakers. Honest to God, that team needs more help. They just need players who are quality NBA players. Jakob Poeltl is a perfect example of that. A reunion with Toronto makes a ton of sense for Jakob Poeltl as well. I think the Raptors could really use someone who is very positionally sound. I know right now a lot of people love to talk about the Raptors defense in terms of, they got so much length, shot blocking with Christian Koloko. They get in the passing lane, they lead the league in deflections. They don't lead the league in defense, though. People, I think, look at stocks in terms of steals and blocks as the indicator of how good a defensive unit is or how good a defensive player is. It's just not the truth. I think that those things play into being a good defender, and sometimes they make up for lack of positioning. But realistically, any coach would tell you they'd prefer positioning over a block that's out of position like 98% of the time anyway. When you're well positioned, it gives you a better chance for good things to happen for you. I think the Dallas Mavericks would be a landing spot for Jakob Poeltl. That's a little tricky, though, because I think San Antonio would be looking for a first-round pick. And I don't know if Dallas is willing to mortgage that at this point. Then we get into Doug McDermott, who shooting about 5 threes a game this year, and he's shooting really well on them. At the time I'm recording this, he's been an awesome player for San Antonio offensively. We know what he is at this point of his career. Everywhere he's been able to shoot the basketball. Again, another guy who I think would make sense for the Lakers. You look at $13 million a year. That lines up pretty well with Patrick Beverley's contract. And maybe it costs the Lakers a second-round pick to get the deal done between Beverley, McDermott, and who knows, the Spurs could maybe even work a third team in that somewhat wants Beverley. Maybe you can pull an extra second-round pick out and a bad contract. So you basically net 2 second-round picks for McDermott potentially. I think that's kind of the high-end value for him. I would be shocked if he goes for a first-round pick unless he's packaged with Jakob Poeltl and there's one first in the deal. I would just be shocked by that. I don't think he's a first-round level player in terms of the trade market right now. But he could help a ton of teams with a pretty friendly contract, right? $13.75 million a year. Next year's his final year, so you're not really locking yourself in too long-term with him either. It's not like a 4 or 5 year deal. So I think teams would be interested in McDermott, looking for a little bit of offensive firepower. Outside of the Lakers, again, another Raptors one here where the Raptors getting Poeltl and McDermott does make some sense. The Raptors right now are just not shooting the 3 ball well at all. Their defense isn't as good as everyone else seems to think it is. Poeltl, McDermott probably solves a good amount of those issues, honestly. Now, in terms of money, it gets a little tough with Toronto because you might have to include some of their decent players into a deal then. So I don't know if they're really likely to get a deal done. But it is important to note that last year, the Spurs traded Thad Young out to Toronto. So these two teams have done business before. It's very possible that they'll call again. But I think that's really the top landing spots for me for Doug McDermott. There's other teams that I think could get involved. Maybe Milwaukee, if they're just looking for a little bit more shooting next to Giannis and Brook Lopez, and Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, of course, who Middleton quietly has not been playing well this year since coming back from his wrist surgery. But, for the most part, I think that a bevy of teams are going to be interested in both Poeltl and McDermott at the right price. Josh Richardson, I would be shocked if he gets traded. I think Boston going on a massive run last year after trading Josh Richardson away is kind of telling to what I feel about Josh Richardson. I just don't think he's that good of an NBA player, honestly. I think he does some good stuff, but I think that overall, you kind of would estimate his impact to be more than it is. And I'm someone who I've watched him very closely for a long time. I had a very vested interest in watching him back in Miami, and then I watched him closely in Philly. I'm a Mavs fan, so I watched him for about 82 games in Dallas. And then I watched him in Boston for half a year, and I was like, oh boy, I don't know what they're getting here. And then I've seen him in San Antonio. He has nights where he's playing really well, and then he has nights where it's just like, oh, Josh Richardson's on the floor. I just don't know if he's really a player that I think a lot of teams would have interest in. My guess with him is he probably just ends up hitting free agency this offseason, and then probably signs a taxpayer mid-level exception this offseason at about $6.5 million a year with some other team that's contending. Zach Collins here, 2 years, $15 million deal. Next year is non-guaranteed, though. That's the final year of his contract, and it's possible that San Antonio doesn't keep him around, but I would be shocked if they don't. I think that they would likely keep him around, just given the fact that they don't have a lot of long-term cap space already, used up, which is going to be the next graphic we talk about here, about their long-term cap space. But Zach Collins, I think, is an okay option. I really liked his game coming out of college. If he could have stayed healthy, I think his career plays out completely differently. If we were to simulate his career 100 times, like probably 45% of the time he becomes like a good NBA starter. 25% of the time he probably ends up being like what he is now. And, there's that wiggle room in between where he's like a quality rotation player. I think Zach Collins is a quality rotation player, but the injuries, I think they've limited really what he's been. And it's been some weird injuries too. It's not like his body's just breaking down on him. It's like he gets hit in the face and, gets a facial fracture and misses, 3 months of a season. He's had some weird circumstances for sure. So Zach Collins, I think that San Antonio is still the best spot for him. I hope to see him continue to get more and more play time. And I hope he stays healthy and on the court, because he is fun to watch when he is playing. Romeo Langford. They got him in the Celtics deal for Derek White last year. I don't have a lot to say about Romeo Langford. I would be shocked if a team in the NBA wants him. I know there's been games where San Antonio starts him. There's a reason this team is ranked last in the NBA in defense, and it's not Jakob Poeltl's fault. Romeo Langford, to me, is just not a good NBA player, and I don't think that there's any trade value for him. But that $5.6 million could be important in terms of attaching him to a Jakob Poeltl. If a team has, say a $16 million player that they were to want to flip for Poeltl, let's say it was Dallas, and they want to trade Bertans and a pick for Poeltl, they really can't do that trade unless someone like Langford was included to make the money work. So Langford could be essential here for San Antonio to get a deal done. That's really the only reason he's included in the tradable players category here for me. The draft pick situation, now this is where things get interesting for San Antonio. They own all of their own first round picks, every single one of them. They only have one swap out with Atlanta, and they do actually have a swap out with Boston in 2028, but who knows what the NBA is going to look like by then. I don't think we have to worry about that too much right now. The Lakers are probably trying to trade their 2028 first as we speak. So I wonder who Rob Pelinka is on the phone with as I make this video. But with all their own first round picks, they have a lot of flexibility here. And they've got, positive swaps where they get to keep the higher pick anyway. So they're in a good spot. Secondly, they own Atlanta's 2025 and 2027 first round picks. And with how Atlanta's looking and a little bit of rumor mill, there's some stuff going on with Trae Young right now, which we're going to talk about this offseason. I promise you he's not going to get traded this year. Trae Young's not going anywhere right now. So if you see people posting, no, Trae Young trades, it's not happening. You're not going to see that on this channel. Trae Young is not going to get traded this season. I would be utterly shocked. It would be the most mind-boggling decision ever in Atlanta to trade their star player this season when he's got 5 more years on his contract. That's just not going to happen. There's zero chance of that. But who cares? If you're San Antonio, you're saying, hey, as long as they trade him by 2025, we're doing pretty good, right? So that's kind of the hope there for San Antonio, is maybe Atlanta crumbles, maybe DeJounte Murray leaves in free agency still, and they reap the benefits. 2025, 2027 first. Let's go Spurs, right? And then thirdly, the tertiary part here, they own Chicago's 2025 first, which is top 10 protected, but with how Chicago's humming, heck, that pick might be a pretty good asset to use in some trades as well. So I think San Antonio here has a lot of fun options. on the table for them. Now, if some other good players became available that are young, I think that they should actually explore making a move for a young player, like almost like a buy now move, using some of these picks, maybe like that Chicago 2025 first, or maybe, sending out one of the swap rights for a later trade. Just if you can get good young talent in the door right now that you can start pairing together with Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, it could go a long way in building this team up in a healthier, better situation long term. I don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen. And I'm not saying that they have to force that, right? If the right offer is not there for you, you don't do it. But I think they should at least explore that and, have some of those exploratory talks with the other 29 teams in the NBA about some of those young guys. I think a great example would be, James Wiseman in Golden State. What does the price point look like for him? You might not even have to give up one of these first round picks. It might just be, hey, we would really love to have Jakob Poeltl right now. He would really help our team. What can we do with Wiseman Poeltl? Is there any way to work out a trade between those two players? That seems tough. The money's pretty close, so you're actually going to be able to work it out financially. But, and I think, honestly, as I'm talking about this, if Golden State was more likely to make trades during the season, I could see it. Now, in the last 6 years, they've only made one in-season trade, and it was D'Angelo for Andrew Wiggins. So I don't think it's the most likely, but that's something, if I'm San Antonio, I'm at least trying to gauge other teams' interest on some of those young players who maybe haven't lived up to hype up to this point that you think you can unlock and get the best out of, or, some actually proven young players that maybe are on the market just based on their contract situation and some of those other elements that go into, these trade discussions. Then the long-term cap space, and this is where it's fun for San Antonio, a team that typically isn't a big free agent destination. Now, I know they got LaMarcus Aldridge nearly half decade ago. At this point, maybe even a little bit more than that. They have loads of money, though. They're going to have a ton of money the next 2-3 years, honestly. The only sizable contracts on the book for next year, Doug McDermott, Keldon Johnson. We already talked about the possibility of trading Doug McDermott, who next year is going to be owed $13.75 million. You clear that out, that's a pretty good contract size for a lot of free agents if you're looking to improve your team in that way. And then Keldon Johnson's making $20 million next year, but his contract's actually descending. And it's a very team-friendly deal, in my opinion. I think they actually could run into the same issue with Keldon Johnson that they just ran into with DeJounte Murray, where they have this nice team-friendly extension, and then based on the extension rules, Keldon Johnson maybe would not want to extend because there's limits to what he can extend for based on how the NBA CBA is set up. But it's possible that changes as well this season at some point with the CBA discussions that are ongoing. But I think the important thing here to talk about for San Antonio, they have a lot of money. If the draft pick situation plays out right for them, they're able to draft one of the top guys, whether that's Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson. It's very possible to see this team actually go out in free agency and be aggressive and try and bring in a good young player or a couple good players to kind of put around Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, and say Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson or maybe Nick Smith Jr., some of the other options. Brandon Miller, I think, is another great example of a guy who would fit in San Antonio. There's a lot of options on the table for them, so they could definitely look to go out in free agency this year and add some players. There's interesting options, guys like Kyle Kuzma out there, who I don't think is really the answer here for them. But I think more so the point is there's good players that they could look to add and actually maybe make a quicker turnaround than a lot of people are expecting, although I don't see it as super likely. Then we look at the buyer seller. They're an impactful seller. To me, this isn't just, we hope to sell and get some picks. I think they have players that can help teams. I think McDermott can really help teams, and I think Jakob Poeltl can really, really help a team, especially if he's even coming off the bench at 20, 25 minutes a game. He could be one of the best backup bigs in the league. Firmly believe that if he's there. I think he's a quality starter. I think he'd be an amazing backup to have for a team that could really help improve some of those minutes. I even look at Boston with Luke Cornett coming off the bench. Now, I know money-wise, Boston's probably not going to make a deal here just in terms of the luxury tax to get Jakob Poeltl long-term, but think about the upgrade there. You go from Robert Williams in your starting lineup and bringing Jakob Poeltl off the bench. That's pretty darn good in my opinion. So there's options here. I don't think that necessarily there's teams that are going to be like, oh my gosh, we need Jakob Poeltl, but I think there's a lot of teams that are going to say, well, Jakob Poeltl could really help us a lot. So I think San Antonio is going to be very impactful this trade deadline, and that projected activity level is going to be very high. I think that the activity in San Antonio's front office is going to be immense this year. And I think if they had a motto or a catchphrase, it's going to be get involved. I think if there's any 3-team, 4-team trade discussions, San Antonio is going to be in the heart of all of those. They've got these mid-level contracts and Jakob Poeltl, Doug McDermott, and some of the others we mentioned, Josh Richardson, for example. They've got options here in guys that you could attach in trades rather easily to get a deal done. So I'm hoping to see them be very active this year. I think they will be. Like I said, I would be kind of surprised if they're not. San Antonio's in a very good long-term position. I think if they get some luck in the lottery, if they are able to add a few really nice players, whether that's through the draft or free agency, I think this team could turn it around long-term. I know right now, Spurs fans, you're not seeing a lot of winning basketball. Enjoy some of these years. I think back to some of my favorite moments with the Dallas Mavericks. Now, Lucas scoring 60 points, 21 rebounds, and 10 assists. That's probably right near at the top in terms of individual performances I've ever seen on a basketball court. But I think, I had so much fun the year Dennis Smith Jr. averaged like 16 points a game as a rookie. We won like almost no games. We were terrible. But I had so much fun watching Dennis Smith Jr. dunk on people. And, he did the little self-tap lob. You can have fun while your team loses, especially if you really watch the games deeply and, you get to know all the players who probably aren't going to stick around in the NBA super long. That's what makes it even more fun, honestly, because, 5 years from now, you're going to say, wow, do you remember when, Lee Johnson was playing some minutes for us? Like, that's awesome. It's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys are really enjoying this season, even though it's not going the way that maybe you would like it to in terms of the win-loss column. If you guys did enjoy this video, please subscribe. I hope you've all had an awesome holiday season. Hopefully spending some time with loved ones, friends, family. I hope you guys, got everything you wanted for Christmas as well underneath the Christmas tree. But, the greatest gift you guys could give us is hitting that subscribe button. It does mean a lot. Thank you so much for even taking the time to watch this video up to this point. I hope you guys really do enjoy what you see here. There's a lot of work that goes in off the camera to prepare something like this and, be able to talk 20 plus minutes about a team and their future outlook and, having to know all their draft picks, everything. There's a lot of work that goes into this. So I do hope you guys enjoy. It's a lot of fun to record. So I've been really enjoying it. I hope you guys have been as well. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.